in Frank's school. Well, the cats are wandering around, or maybe a cat fight here. 146th day of this 5th year, and Portugal and the Alps is my subject, but these are prequels, and you might think, oh, are they going to go on forever? This is the third prequel, discussion of 3 previous trips in detail, and up the letter F in describing this. Well, it's not going to go on forever. As a matter of fact, today, I'll be fairly brief today, I think. We first make it to the Alps, and I'll say about that. 2 corrections though. On the blackboard I had 145, I think. Now that may be wrong too. This maybe should be 147. I'll have to look. Anyway, that was a wrong number on the board. I think, I don't know. And Busaco is with a U. That's that forest, that palace that I gave you a link for back in Portugal. I say back in Portugal because now we're going to the Alps. There are 3 what I'm thinking of as insertion points. If I really do make a trip in 1970, in 2017 or 2018 or whenever. I mean, if I would make the trip and you decided you would like to come along, let me show you some of this stuff. Well, you'd be most welcome. There's 3 points of insertion, I sort of say. The first is at Lisbon, and that would be basically the day I get there. And that would be, if you did that, you'd be in Lisbon a good bit longer, or else you'd come with me as I and a friend. As I've said before, I just can't imagine anymore doing this by myself. Would rent a car and drive around in the mountains of Portugal. You'd be welcome on that too if you wanted to. But anyway, that would be one point. About 4 days later, another point to join me would be once again in Lisbon. After that, drive around where, and I say Portugal because it wouldn't just be Lisbon. I'll tell you about this in great detail once I actually get to the trip. And the third one is right here, we're in Geneva. If you flew into Geneva, that's what Joyce and I did. We flew from Lisbon right across Spain. We skipped Madrid and Spain. We flew into Geneva. There at the Geneva airport, I would meet you, and I would show you the Alps very happily. What Joyce and I did was rent a car. As soon as we got to Geneva, and as I recall, we had to go in town, in the city, to rent a car. But we were barely in Geneva. From that time, I have almost no memories at all of the city of Geneva because we rented a car and headed for the mountains. I keep asking myself whether this was only me that had this great desire to get to the mountains, get to the Alps, see the Alps. I'm quite sure I shared this with Joyce, and she felt the same kind of passion to see these things, I think. Anyway, we rented a car and we headed upstream, up the Rhone River. But the Geneva is right at the end of Lake Geneva, is one of the names of it. In English it's called that usually. And it's right where the lake ends and the river once again begins. And we were driving up the north side or the west side of Lake Geneva, which is the sunny side, driving through all these terraced vineyards. I remember this is 1970. I mean, this is 46 years ago. I was 24 years old. But I'm doing this because there are certain days which I call formative, which stand so clear in my memory. Well, driving along among those vineyards does not stand that clear to me, and I think there's a reason for it. Even though they were terraced, the car goes along the terrace, and a terrace, and you don't, from that angle, you don't really see how cool that is to have the steps of the terraces. But in any case, we saw them, and I have a better plan for your trip. But they're there, and the sun comes off that lake, and of course the sun's coming from the sky, and between that combination, there is a lot of sun on those terraces, and it's famous for its wine. Anyway, we drove along there and went right past Lausanne. That's, by the time you get to Lausanne, you're up at almost at the top of the lake. But we just kept driving, and we drove into valley. Now it's the longest, deepest valley in Europe, Western Europe at least, I think. The Rhone, the Rhone Valley. It's actually called Le Valais or Vallis in German. That section of Switzerland. And at the top of the lake, you go in, and you're now in between extremely high mountains on both sides. And as I say, it's the longest and deepest valley in Western Europe. You could look at it, fact check me if you want on that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Anyway, as we started to go in, at a certain point that day, and this was a formative day, at a certain point that day, I think it was, or maybe it was the very next day, but I think it was that day already, before we got to Martigny, which is really just, well, it's like the last city, I guess you'd call it a city, on the river before the river starts out into the lake. I realized that now I was in the second most beautiful place on earth that I had ever seen. The first was Machu Picchu, as I explained. I'll still stand by that. That has this natural beauty that I witnessed, not being now full of tourists. It might be diminished some, but I doubt it. But this was almost its equal, what I was looking at. And I do remember that we very soon, almost as soon as we had gone into this narrow valley, I decided I wanted to get up and see what it looked like from up there. And we took a road. We had no idea where it was going to be going, but it was a road that clearly went up the mountainside. It was on the right, that I remember, and it was before Martigny. I could probably find it again if I wanted to. And for a while, we climbed up this road and came out to where there were some farms and saw what it looked like from up there. It was maybe at that point that I realized this is the second most beautiful place on earth that I had ever seen. And I remember seeing the way they stacked wood. I saw the houses, farm women in long dresses. This is a long time ago. I don't remember real clearly, but anyway, it was formative. The experience of realizing that there could be a place as scenic, as beautiful, and yet as livable as this. I mean, one of the things about this was not empty. This was a living, for people. This was a living place. Well, anyway, eventually, soon, we turned around, came back down, and went on. I suspect a little bit that it might have been late in the day when we got into Geneva. Not late, but that we probably didn't have enough time to just dawdle. We had to get going. And so we got to Martigny. There we found a hotel, and there we stayed. And I remember there, once we were in the hotel, we heard this brass band playing. And I thought, oh, what is this? Go out and hear the town's brass band. It was out giving a little mini concert. And I think they were doing it because the train was arriving or something, a way of greeting the train. Now remember, Switzerland is so much about tourism. And I'll say more about that, I think. And I mean, we were just amazed. Well, that gets us to the Alps, and I don't have very many more days now to tell you about the last of these prequels. Bye for now.